Hi, welcome to In the Workshop with Mark Tunley. It is 14th of December 23, getting close to Christmas now. Weather's a little bit nicer today. Yesterday was horrible, but we're still in the workshop because it's greyish and coldish, but it wasn't raining. Anywho, I digress. Going to have a quick chat about how I use the Mark Tunley Mark 1 specialist float rod. There's two, the 13.6 and the 11.6, and how I designed them and why I designed them. So, I've got a couple of them there. Two lengths. One of them's 11.5 foot and the other one's 13.5 foot. And the 13.5 foot has a retractable butt section, but I'll cover that in a few more details first of all. So one thing I wanted to mention was the specialist float rod. It's how I came about designing it. I came about it from the other way. When you build a float rod, most people, you get locked into a legacy thought process in the design of a float rod. And immediately you think about light hook links and small hooks and dace and bits and bobs and tippy actions and that kind of stuff. So then when most people design heavier weight float rods, they're still coming at from that kind of legacy design. And the way I came about it was from the opposite end, from specialist rods. I just thought to myself, I'm going to design a specialist rod, but I'm going to design it for float fishing. So if you think about a barbel rod of, say, a chub barbel rod of 1.5 pound test curve or 1.75 pound test curve, you would be in no doubt about its pulling forces and its ability to play fish, grabbing chub away from snags and big barbel. You just wouldn't question its ability to do it. But the moment you get into a float rod, you start questioning its level of power. So by designing it as a specialist rod, but then adding in the requirements of a float fishing rod to that design, overcomes these problems. So in essence, I made a specialist rod that was just lightweight as you could hold it, because it didn't need to cast 10 ounces of lead across the Trent or anything like that. It just needed to ping out floats. And that way you could build in all the playing force, the playing ability into the rod, but keeping it light. So you come about the design from the opposite end. And the rod is crisp and light to use in the early stages with small fish. And if you get into something big and you really need to get into the butt section, you really can. A quick look at the fundamental differences between the two rods. The 11.5 is a fixed handle, standard rod. Pencil thin, high modulus, 40-ton Japanese Toray carbon, expensive as hell, beautiful as hell, stunning cork handle. You've seen them all before on plenty of other videos. Done. So the 13.6 version basically has retractable handle. Everything's the same handle configuration apart from the extension part, and that's it. And the reason why I wanted to do this style for the 13.6 was I didn't want a three-piece. I wanted us to be able to still have a two-piece rod that you can pack down in the elasticated rod tops with the pockets on, hold in the plummets, whatever you need to do, and it go around like your barbel rods. So it just feels the same thing, but she's at 13.6. Now, why 13.6 as well? Well, apart from the fact that it actually fitted well, the design wasn't compromised at all. It was a deliberate design, hence the extension part there. But I've spoke to loads of hundreds, thousands probably of people about float rods over the years. And there's so much dilemma between like 13 foot or 14 foot and then 15 and 12. And there seems to be just this foot increments. And I even went through the process as myself when I was looking at a mid sort of length rod. I was thinking, well, do I go for a 13 or a 14? And you're umming and ahhing. And when I looked at it in more detail, most people were using 13s and 14s in very similar situations. And the difference is obviously a foot. And that's a foot. It's nothing. And it's the difference between a 13 and a 14 is almost unrecognizable at times. Tiny bits you can feel, but There's not a lot in it. So what I did was I decided to not do a 13 or a 14. I just split the difference and went 13 and a half. So the rods in ranges are, as far as I'm concerned, 12 foot, 15 foot, or should I say 15 foot there, and one in the middle, 1.5 foot difference at 13 and a half. And you can get rid of all that dilemma. So you either have a short rod, long rod, or a medium for floats. Anywho, so that's a bit of background behind why I picked 13 and a half feet as well, because it covered all that sort of long ground. And the 11 and a half was just a lovely sweet point in the float rods where people are around smaller venues, streams, etc., creepy crawly in between bushes, not a lot of overhead room, etc. And you want those typical chubby rivers where you might want to be able to have something a bit shorter. So that worked really well. Anyway, how I use them, I'm sort of touching on it already. My personal preference for usage always is the big one, the 13 and a half, as long as I've got enough room over my head, because it gives me extra length for mending, gives me extra length for over weed, that kind of stuff, you know, the marginal stuff, and you're trying to get, and it's easier with a longer rod to hold out and trot from. So it's my personal preference, but I do have obviously the 11 and a half as well, and I use that a lot. So line ratings, it's a bit of a strange one. I don't give them a line rating, but I know what lines I like to use with them. They're test curves. They're both 1.5 pound. The bigger one is slightly more steely in the butt section because of the extra length to stop any sort of wobble. But fundamentally, they're 1.5 pounds, so they'll pull in anything. So fish as big as you dare. And lines, I run on both of those, I run 10 pound. I run 0.26 high quality mono and sort of NT70 levels. And that sounds ridiculous trotting with 10 pound line, but feel free to trot away with 8 pound line. I just like the extra abrasion resistance. So if I'm getting close to snags and stuff like that, I don't really care. I'm fully on it. So I use those with heavy line, as I've said, and big floats. They're usually on the rivers. I'll be trotting with 4 grams and upwards. And on the still waters, they will flick, believe it or not, they'll flick 2s quite easily. So you're unlimited on what you can use. And a bit of a strange thing for this kind of rod, but they work really well with these bagging wagglers, pellet wagglers as well. They flick them beautifully. So this is these are specialist rods for float fishing, not float rods for specialist style fish. So that's the concept of way to look at it. Big proper rods for more robust type fishing. And you literally do have the power now. They're unlimited. I speak to people who've got them all the time, and they're catching double figure barbel and pulling like crazy for whatever reason they need to. And they're using strong lines, and you now have the power. So generally I just use them for big fish. Soon as, if I'm on the still waters, it's just when you're thinking carp, bream, tench, big. And on the rivers, it's, you know, big fish, barbel, chub, big bream, for the specialist guys. So that is a quick look, or quick reasons and how I use the Tunley Mark 1 specialist float rods, and roughly why I came about the design of them, the design concept. Lovely. Hope you have a good Christmas, and enjoy the fishing.